Hi everyone, it's Bronwyn Corlett here with Edge, and we are having an Edge conversation about what will 2022 look like. It's hard to believe in some ways that another year has gone by, and I think all of us experienced a lot of pivoting right at the end of 2021 that many of us were hoping we wouldn't have to. So I know Christmases and New Year's looked a lot different. So as we gather together, and this time we are trying to pull together what we're hopeful of in 2022 and maybe some of the realities that we're facing in 2022. So anybody have some opening thoughts about what 2022 will look like?
Oh my gosh, that intro, when you said the word pivot, I was just thinking, yuck. We've been using the word pivot far too much. And so when you were just doing that intro, I was thinking, so what does it feel like? Well, like, what am I feeling? And what am I seeing other people and what are people exposing to me? And I'm like, frustration. I feel like there's like some frustration. And I wonder when I think about 2022, when you hold frustration and when frustration starts to bubble up, what does that mean? And so it can mean in some way that there could be a lot of action. People might actually stop discerning because they're like, I just am frustrated, I need to move. It could also be disenfranchisement with existing things that are happening. It could be a willingness to actually now move on maybe what we're holding because of the pandemic and things that we thought we couldn't move. And now the frustration is like, no, we got to do it now. And now's the time. And so I feel like there's a bunch when you right away, what's coming up, I was like, well, what emotion? And then from that emotion, maybe what is that leading us to? So I think that when I think from a place of frustration, there could be action that is misaligned, but this could be also the action to do things that people have been holding on to their hearts for some time that are finally willing to take that leap of faith. So there's some tension of, a little bit of negativity in there and yet a little bit of positive hope as well. So we'll see.
Yeah, I resonate with that, Carla, and I think I have a sense that the good and the bad will both increase, and that that this is actually a sign of a tipping point, of a the most rigid and committed of the backlash against change will dig in and show its ugly head, and also new things will become possible and suddenly happen in ways that that didn't seem possible before, seemed impossible. And that's actually been my experience. And I feel a little schizophrenic, really. What is really happening? Is it good or bad? But it's volatile. And, so it's a good place for faith, a good place to practice and to trust the spirit that's in this, right? That is both catabolic and anabolic. It tears down and builds up, and something new is happening. That's the good news.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting. I'm going to frame it up a little differently because of course I've got more of a technology lens on it, but there's a certain maturity now that's happened. 2020, 2021 was all about, oh my gosh, we got to get online, we got to figure all this technology out. And I think that maybe there's a gap that's widened between those that have embraced and those that haven't and are really struggling. But for those that have, we now have this opportunity to reflect. And it's interesting that you're obviously bringing in the spiritual element. We have to reflect now, okay, we've got this technology, we've kind of figured it out, but is it good? Are we doing it now that we are no longer in panic mode? How does that relate to, is it becoming inclusive or exclusive, right? Is it culturally relevant? Is it not? So I think that for those of us that are in a position to sort of look at technology from that perspective of we're no longer panicked. Now we need to plan this out because this is the new reality. Now we have an opportunity and maybe a moral duty to sit back and look at the bigger questions around, how does this relate to the Indigenous experience? How does this relate to accessibility and all these sorts of other things? So it's a really interesting time for me.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think last week we had a meeting about that brought up some of the challenges in rural areas of access to technology and internet. And one of the things I find interesting is that I've noticed in my own experience that some of the large tech companies have actually responded to that, not singing all the praises to them, but on the other hand, there's suddenly access to a lot of internet and data at a much cheaper rates than there was 2 years ago in my personal experience. And I think there's an acknowledgement from the government as well that we just you can't put everything online and then not have people, not give people access to that at reasonable rates. So I think that's hopeful. I think that's exciting. There's potential. And I think I agree with Rob in that I think some of those things that were getting put off, like I think we were in crisis mode, and then we were really hopeful that the vaccines would solve that and we would just be back out. Pfizer, I think, just announced yesterday that they expect, frankly, it'll be quite a few years probably of COVID and rounds of vaccines and having to isolate again. And so I think there's an acknowledgement that this reality is not going away just with a magical shot. So I think maybe what's hopeful in that too is hopefully the willingness to redefine and reorganize some of the things that were instant fixes or crisis fixes into more long-term solutions. And hopefully, I'm very hopeful that those things will also have equity lenses and justice lenses to them. And I think I really also just pray that people are also just careful with themselves. I think we've all exhausted some of our crisis energies, and it can be hard. Hopefully we've also built up our resilience in that, but I think that's a very fine balance with so many mental health issues and schools opening and what. So I don't know, I'm going to hold all of that in a hopeful prayer because I think that there's great possibilities.
I think it's interesting what this past couple of years have done for us in the way that we evaluate ourselves, our own personal lives, because everything was shaken up so much that it was a reevaluation of priorities and like what's important and what do I care about? How do I want to participate in the world and act in the world? How do I want the world to participate and act with me? And so I feel as if we're kind of in this like dawning age of integrity that's like coming forward, where you have all of these thoughts and ideas that you may have had before, but your life was just too cluttered or society was too cluttered to really be able to focus on them. But they're really starting to take center stage. You're seeing like 4-day work weeks being a conversation. You're seeing mental health be a larger conversation. You're seeing like reprioritization of family and work and trying to figure out those dynamics. And so I feel as if there's this, there's this kind of like deep leaning into what does it mean for my thoughts and my actions as an individual, as well as a society and as a church, like how are they all coming together and re-knitting into this new fabric that we're going to lean into in the future. And so that's really been kind of the little spark in the back of my mind of like, for myself of like, how do I lean further into this like feeling of integrity, but then how are we all participating and advocating for deeper integrity within our systems and within other things that have been so shaken up now that like that original foundation that we thought was immovable is now movable. So like, let's see how we can lean into that and make some real change.
I love that is your reflection. That was bubbling up for me too, 100%. I mean, when Rob was talking about the tipping point and this is it, and then this, but what is the tipping point? And I love that it's this moment of reflection and discernment. One thing that I think about of 2022 is then, well, what about, 21, 22? So 100 years from now, 7 generations from now, like, how are the decisions that we're making on this time that we're finally, like Alexander's saying, having this pause, making the right decisions for 7 generations from now? And I really feel that we kept on doing the same things, just like Alexander was saying. And now so it's not even just for now, But I think about, Black Mirror, if you've heard of that, that series, where it basically takes one theme and then it says 50, 100, 200 years from now, what would the world be? And I think sometimes we go, it doesn't really matter. But really, for climate crisis, the decisions that we make today, we're probably the generation that can make the decisions that are going to make the biggest impact in the future in a way that other generations, yes, they've had, but it's so obvious to us. We have the knowledge, we have the connection, we have the time at this point. So all these things have really rallied to this point in time where we can actually create the world we want to live in.
Yeah, I've been thinking, just reflecting, it's tearing down and building up. I think the thing that we're tearing down are the barriers we've put between categories that became so important in kind of the modern mindset of separating things out and looking at these various compartments and components and so on. So I think at a practical level, I think the church is getting better, and this will happen significantly in 2022 at business practice. Business and faith are not separate things. We got to know what's what and do it well. We got to know what part. And like Alexandra, the discernment won't be keeping faith separate from business. It'll be discerning how doing our business is faithful. What it means, like I was really taken by a minister the last week. It was talking about, I love closing churches because after it closes, I ask the question, now what? So it's like if you're free of the structures that are somehow feeling constricting and keeping you in something that's not viable or faithful or life-giving, it's not like the death of faith. It's like the reintegration of faith in a new context. And that person is now doing subsistence farming and making herbal remedies. Like, it's amazing. But it is kind of the freeing up. So I see more business, and then on the other side, on the faith side, what does our faith call us to be together in community, which is really what church is, right? It's not getting people into the pews or into the Sunday school on Sunday morning. It's and the world is crying out, my God, for faithful, trusting, trustworthy leadership and action for the big problems that we're facing. Like they're big problems. And I hear the refrain over and over, yes, we can, together. That's really what the word ecclesia means, a gathering, getting together. What can we do together as one body with these values? Anyway. Yeah. So I find that exciting.
Well, I get excited hearing you speak almost every time, actually. But in particular here, I was going to chime in with the very same thing, that this forced redefinition of the Sunday worship sort of ritual and the opening up of these barriers that are geographic and that are, culturally segmented into being able to reach out beyond your geographic limits and so forth, has opened up some communities and some communities of faith to say, well, what is church now? Do we care about getting back to normal? Do we care about bums in pews anymore? And should we? And I think, the answer that I'm hearing many people coming to on their own is, well, we have to go back to the basics of what church was supposed to be. And this community, this hub, right? How does it become, again, a central hub for all aspects of the community, super inclusive? And does that mean that it's still a building or not? And I think that's going to be different for different people. But, we're starting to see churches that are completely virtual, or churches that have both, but their attendance on Sunday is vastly outstripped by their online attendance. And these sorts of things become an interesting discussion point that are challenging for many, that are threatening for some, but I think ultimately open us up to the possibility of reimagining how the church can find its place in both individuals and families and the community around them.
I had the pleasure of meeting with a congregation last week who was saying that they've actually when you talk about bums and pews, Tom, they're actually doing better sort of financially now than they were before. And it's has nothing to do with bums and pews, of course, because they haven't been able to gather in person for much of the last 2 years, and have been able to actually get really creative about how to create community. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges. So they were able to meet before Christmas, and to do a prayer walk. So they engaged in an activity where they could gather and engage in person, even though they could stay spread out and get into nature. So I think the biggest challenge is being open to those redefinitions. And I do think that with all of the changes we've all gone through, that have been many of which have been forced, it's a resistance to that is completely understandable and completely natural, I think, too, to feel like, if only it would go back, or I would really like to hold on to these. I think around Christmas, I experienced a lot of that of, I want those traditions, like I want that thing that we've done every year for so many years. And I think it's really hard on people to let some of that go. So I think that needs to be, we need to hold that space, but also encourage those new, what's the why? We talk about often at Edge, like what's the why, and why do things matter, not just what. And perhaps there's ways of doing things differently that still can fulfill that why in new and innovative ways. And I think more than ever, we need that creativity, but it's also a difficult time to put some energy into that. But yeah.
I think there's something kind of unique about this moment as well, in relation to refocusing away from large, robust, vibrant, huge communities, and say, okay, we have a capacity limit of 10 people or 5 people or what have you. Jesus talked to tiny little handfuls of people. The original churches that started were all home churches, and really like led by these like little groups of people who came together, and they were just like, okay, there's something about like this story that I've heard or what have you that I want to like dive into. And so maybe there's a bit of an opportunity here to like kind of stop freaking out about like missing people or like not having the big community moments, but really lean into like those small community moments. Who are the 3 or 4 people you can sit outside with? And I know it's very cold and stuff today, but if you can gather around a fire or go for a walk safely, like those 3 or 4 people who you can have these discussions with, and still be able to meet kind of more comfortably in person. Distance, I'm not advocating for going against any public health regulations here, but like really just allowing for that cultivation of like small, deep, mighty ministries, that, and also for the emergence of leaders who may not have felt that they were leaders before. They were like, okay, the leaders are up at the pulpit, like I'm sitting here in the pew, but now it's like, okay, well, within my family, the 3 or 4 people that I've decided to gather are my kids and my partner or something like that. And we are going to have our own little family ministry. And, so there's like kind of this space to lean into, lean into tiny ministry and know that it's faithful and full of lots of interesting things.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I think you brought up a good point too. We are gathering from different places, each of us today. And so some of the protocols are even very different in our different places and are probably across the country. So perhaps we can answer the question of, what are you being personally called to? Where is the energy drawing you for 2022 as you consider perhaps your unique locations and situations?
Yeah, so I think just this conversation's been so rich. And I think what I'm hearing in all of it is that the time is now. and that I think the culture of innovation across the United Church is happening, but even across Canada, it's not just, the time is ripe. And so I think what I'm being called to is to continue to be on the edge myself and to, break down those barriers and any boundaries. And, I think like when's the time to do something? I think the time is now.
Yeah, I agree with that. The time is now. The future calling for me is something new. I plan to retire at the end of August from this formal work. And so the question of what does faith and faithfulness look like beyond, my formal United Church ordained minister kind of stuff, beyond edge, never beyond the edge, but, beyond this particular role. It's so open and I'm so excited about it. Like, I don't know, I really don't know what it would actually be, but, I've considered online spiritual practice because the need for people to stay grounded, I just see it. Like, how could we scale kind of an online spiritual practice network? Church properties, every time we have a conversation, I think of a new retirement project. I'm going to buy these little white clapboard churches that churches can't even hold on to because it's costing them money, and go in, renovate it, live there for a while, gather the community partners, turn them into a community gathering space that can teach communities to be community again. And then I'll move on to the next one. Kelly, now move on to the next one. Or, maybe it's an affiliate marketing network for faith-based social enterprise. It's like, I have no idea. These are the crazy thoughts that go through my head. What I do know, and this conversation is just a sign of it, I will continue to be amazed and feel privileged to be accompanied by people like you folks in this conversation, and the folks that God is raising up to live into this new time. So thanks.
I think I'm really being called into a place of deep listening. I think I've been paying attention, and there's been quite a bit of doing. I mean, I still have a long to-do list, so it's not the time is now to do all those things, but also really trying to listen and pay attention to those whys. Like, how do we not just pivot in the moment, but what does it look like? And as Carla says, in 100 years, like, what choices, what should I be paying attention to now to make the choices that will really make a big difference in, the 20, 50, 100 years, which frankly, for the last 2 years, I've been like looking at the next few months. I haven't been dreaming that big. So maybe it's time to dream a bit bigger again and listen.
I think my calling for 2022 is really just to lean into peace and say, like, okay, how can I make peace the center of like all of the things that I'm doing, and not the stress and the chaos, and like, it's like, okay, there's another rule coming down the way, or there's another variant, or there's another hiccup in trying to progress something with work, but like all of these things, it's like, okay, well, I feel as if I'm following where God is calling me right now in my life. And I don't know if I've ever felt that before. So there's some form of peace in like knowing that I feel as if like I'm moving in the right direction. And so leaning back into that solid space feels like what I want to try to pay attention to. Whether or not that happens in action, different story. But for now, it's the intention.
That's amazing. For me, I think, I'm just wrapping up a fairly intensive project looking at all the interesting things that are happening across the country in the United Church and beyond. And so that's coming to an end. And so it gives me a natural opportunity to say, well, what exactly comes next? And, the thought that keeps coming to my mind more and more is this stuff that we're talking about. This is really, really what it's all about. I think I'm coming out of 20, 30 years of kind of disenfranchisement with the whole notion of the church as an institution and the relationship to democracy and the society and economics. And, you mentioned business and all of that kind of complex stuff, and been a bit frustrated with things. And this project has given me hope because I've seen people innovating despite the challenges, and these conversations are just so exciting. So I want to do more of this year and see where it goes down the road.
Thank you, Tom. I think that was a brilliant wrap up. I mean, I think thank you for this rich conversation. Thank you all for your ideas and your insights. And as we look forward to 2022, it's obvious that despite us being back in lockdown, many of us, there is something new happening. There's a new energy and a different, perhaps, way forward. So many blessings on each of you, and please listen, get ready for next time, where we're going to look at what does future church look like, and it plays really well into this conversation. So, Tom's already getting warmed up. So many blessings on your day. Thank you for joining us for Edgy Conversations, and take care.